Meetup. So let's do it.
Joe, morning.
Good morning. Great to see you. Great to have you here today. Before we get into it, anything you want to add before you go into your demo?
No, I think you had a good summary. I'm passionate about testing. 21 is my third company. I've been working with organizations to apply AI for quite a bit of time, and so I've worked with folks at Walmart, Salesforce, Verizon, Swisscom, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Autodesk, and many others. And I kind of I shifted my views of what AI can and cannot do in testing, and so excited to share that with you and the audience.
Sounds great. And Shani, like I said, I talked to you on my podcast, and I'm like, oh, I have to actually see this. I think people need to really see something to appreciate what you've done there. And like you mentioned, you talked to a lot of companies, so I think you baked in a lot of functionality that people really need or want rather than just making assumptions. So really excited to see what you have for us today, and the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Okay, so so Joe said I'm going to talk a little bit about what 21 does. Um, I mean, I so my first company was essentially a digital lab for mobile and web, and that's kind of where I first saw the challenges around test automation. Then second company was doing codeless AI-based test automation for web, but I really thought the bigger opportunity was in mobile. And I'm sure many of you are experiencing the challenges of Appium and iOS versus Android, and kind of the lengthy release cycle, and React-based application, Flutter-based application. So one of the challenges with mobile is really the number of development frameworks and how Appium works with each. And so we at 21 wanted to resolve that and wanted to build something that essentially we built five things. So one is something that's super easy to use. You can write the test in under an hour. Does require you for any scripting. You can write some custom code, but the idea is that it's going to be lightweight and it's not something that will take you 2 or 3 days. Two, we wanted to build something that's stable and reliable, which means we needed a very sophisticated locator system, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. A big challenge with mobile is the various frameworks. So some frameworks don't have IDs, some do. So in some cases, Appium is not able to pull the object tree for some of these elements. So a lot of challenges that you need to overcome when you're doing mobile. The first thing is just self maintenance. So maintenance, we heard from customers who've tried to go through the journey of automation is a big challenge. So we want to make something that's mostly self-maintained. And then the last two things, we didn't want to assume that you have a mobile device. And so, I mean, I'm using an iPhone, but if I had a mobile app that's probably going to be Android based, I would either need to go to the store and buy a device, and then it's most likely just going to be one device. And so that's one challenge, especially in time of COVID. Many of you probably have a bunch of devices lying around, but you're not in the office, and so you don't necessarily have access to a lot of these devices. And especially now, people are less likely to share devices among themselves. And so something that's purely cloud, you just sign up, you upload your app, and you start testing. And then finally, and maybe Joe, you and I can touch upon that later on, is the connection to production. There's tons of information in production that can help us make testing much better. And so that's kind of what we set to build. I've been playing around with the idea of AI-based testing and autonomous testing for quite a while. I will probably touch upon some of the scenarios later on, but I think AI can help you write better tests, but it's not going to write the test for you, literally without any human intervention. So with that, let's dive in a little bit. So under the hood, what makes 21 unique is the way we model applications. So as I mentioned, you don't need mobile devices to write your tests. So we offload the application into our database into a model of screens and edges. For screens, we keep the viewport. We also keep the object tree. and we make a lot of calculations on the locators that I'll touch upon later on. And we also keep the edges, which are essentially the connection between two screens, and what functionality connects them. While we do that, we also discover the functionality of those screens, and what that allows us to do is it then allows us to write a test that's mostly pre-built, and so we have all the screens in our database, and as you kind of choose your flow visually, we'll just plug in the actions. Now, under each and every action, there's again a very sophisticated locator system that's agnostic to the framework and whether there are any IDs or there are no IDs. And it's sophisticated enough to understand what you're doing, and based on what you're doing, plug in the right actions. So for example, in the case of Starbug, I can click on sounds good and then navigate to allow location, but I can also click on, I can also skip that and click directly on, and go directly to favorites, in which case it's gonna actually click on maybe later. So it's sophisticated enough to kind of plug in the actions based on what you're doing. The graph that I mentioned is a self-learning graph. So every edge that you add, every screen that you add or remove, it's constantly learning from all your tests. So the more tests you create, the more expand this graph becomes. It also works the other way around. So if I just perform an action on the screen, and by the way, you can see, we identify everything on the screen. We also give you the object tree on the right side in case the element is for some reason not on the viewport, or there's all kinds of overlays. But as you kind of click on where you want to navigate to, we already populate the next action. So the idea is that we're always one step ahead of where you want to be. But you're writing the test, you're defining the scenario, you're defining the assertions. We're just helping you out with making it much faster and much more accurate. Wide set of range of actions that you can do. I mean, you can, first of all, you can customize your data. We also have a way of plugging in data autonomously, and so we'll identify the context of the screen and we'll populate relevant actions based on that. You can use parameters. Let's assert for the username. Everything is drag and drop, so you can drag and drop screens, you can drag and drop actions, so it's very, very responsive. Let's just do a final assertion. So the time from writing a test or from test creation to the point where you're actually running the test is literally, I mean, Joe, what we've been talking for about 3 minutes or so.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's pretty much it. And I just created the test. I'm just going to run that test, and now the test gets executed. Under the hood, we've already plugged in, we already pre-integrated with emulators and real devices, so you don't have to worry about that. So there's a wide range of emulators, real devices. We're running standard Appium under the hood. We can integrate into any other grid provider. So if you are using, I don't know, Perfecto, Cobiton, Sauce Labs, Test Object, Genymotion, what have you, we'll be able to support that as well. But we didn't want to make the assumption that you now need to start having another provider, etc. You can do that down the line. If you already have one, that's perfectly fine. We take care of the setting up the device, the desired capabilities, installing the application. We have a build management system that allows you to choose which devices you wanna, or which builds you wanna test, and what you're seeing right now, the actual screens. So took us a long time to kind of figure out how to visualize mobile. It's a different footprint. You're doing that on a browser, so and as you can see, we're also highlighting I mean, it's very visual. We're highlighting each and every element that you're clicking on. And so we keep track of videos, logs. So there's a lot to work with when something actually fails. And that's it. So, I mean, the time that it took from writing a test to actually running the test successfully was about 3 minutes. And that's kind of what we set to do with 21. Joe, maybe I'll take a pause here. I want to talk about the auto maintenance a little bit, and maybe how we initially capture the screens, and kind of connect to the full stack. But I'll take a pause here. I've been talking for a few minutes. I'll let you take the lead.
Sounds good. So, Shani, just a little background for folks. So, how did this work originally? You just upload this is only for mobile, is what I understand as of now. And for it to work, someone uploads their code and automatically your application will read it using AI, and then they're able to create tests using more of like a codeless type approach. Is that correct?
Yeah, so essentially you sign up, you create a project, can be iOS or Android, you just upload your build, pretty straightforward. We don't need the source code, so we are working with the packaged, with a compiled application, so a .app or an APK. And that's about it, and you start testing. We have two types of customers. We have customers with autonomous testing enabled, in which case we'll actually map a lot of those screens ourselves. And that usually takes, 30, 60 minutes. But even if you don't have any tests, so we created what we call a debugger or recorder, and what that recorder allows you to do is it allows you essentially in real time, you start an interactive session, we spin up a device, we install the application, and everything that you're doing is in interactive mode being recorded. And so that's a way to update your test. That's a way to bring screens into that graph that I showed you. And while you're doing that, again, the graph gets created. So it's all happening under the hood, but every new edge or screen that you create makes itself available for future tests through the AI.
Shani, so I know people are going to ask this.
By the way, is not the most responsive framework, and so we had to find a lot of ways to optimize Appium to make that work.
So that was actually one of my questions. I know someone was going to ask about Appium. You are using Appium, but you're adding extra things behind the scenes that make it more so-called reliable, I guess, or easier to use, I guess, is the point.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so first of all, again, we had to develop a very sophisticated locator system in Appium. By the way, before I do that, I just want to show we also do screen compare. So if you are adding a screen that already exists in the database, we want to keep the hygiene of the database, so we'll actually alert you that there's actually a screen that already exists in the database, and you can accept or reject the name. And that's a pretty sophisticated system for managing screens. Each screen also has one instance, so as you create multiple tests, if you update a screen in one test, it will get updated in all the others. So that significantly reduces the overhead of maintenance. But we'll talk about maintenance later on. Yeah, you're right. I mean, Appium has a lot of edge cases. First of all, the execution time. I mean, you make an API call, and depending on the framework, it can take somewhere between 20, 30 seconds to 5 and 10 minutes. When we initially tested React applications, I mean, it used to take 5, 10 minutes for each API call to come back. And if for those that have used Appium in React applications, they probably, hopefully they found a workaround or started using detox or something like that. So we had to optimize for the API calls. We're now able to test React applications, for example, in under 2 minutes. flows that used to take, literally 30 and 40 minutes. Another challenge, actually maybe less with Appium, more with just running test automation, especially on real devices. When we tested on simulators, it was pretty easy, but then you move to real devices, and real devices are not enterprise grade. So you get all kinds of pop-ups and, upgrade your device, access to, photos and contacts and all kinds of accounts that already existing on the device. So we had to develop a very sophisticated root cause analysis that once a step fails, actually looks at an inventory of system messages, detects if there is one, and if there is, it's able to disable back and disable and revert back to the last action and try to do that again. So yeah, a lot of work, and of course retries and all kinds of basic mechanisms to make sure that when you're running a test, you're getting the actual result, and you don't run a nightly regression and you get a bunch of tests that fail because of reasons that has nothing to do with the application.
Cool. And Brian, just want to know really quick, because you are using Appium, are you able to see the code, or is this all black box type of scripting going on behind the scenes?
So our code, we really create that code on the fly. The reason being, I'll show that. I'm going to jump between two applications just to show you this isn't like just a mock-up or something. So the challenges have to do with, again, some of the frameworks that we're testing, actually most of the frameworks that we're testing literally don't have any IDs. And so, for example, if I show you this element that you're seeing right now that we're clicking on, and I open the object tree, then you'll see this application literally has no IDs. And so, oh, sorry, my fat fingers. And so as we run the test, for example, the way that we identify this type of element has to do with the position on the screen and the bounds. But as you can imagine, when you're running on different screen resolutions and different devices, you actually have to convert those. So we do all of that on the fly. So that's just one reason why we don't have actually static scripts. I mean, I'm sure the team can somehow come up with a snapshot of the actual script, but same for the root cause analysis, and so it's all happening on the fly in real time. By the way, this element that we're clicking on, this one is actually this image view, if I remember correctly. And so you can see there's literally no way for me to know which image view, which view group, etc. And so it's a combination of about 6-7 locators that we look at to make sure that we're agnostic to the development framework.
Cool. So it sounds like at runtime, if something changes, someone changes an idea or something, that's when the AI comes in. It's able to know, okay, I know these other locators can be used to identify this image that they're trying to interact with.
Exactly. That's a big part of the AI. Yes. The other part is the maintenance, and so again, a big challenge or big complaint that we have from customers that have tried to automate the testing is that maintenance becomes a big overhead, and so they just decided to give up and go back to do manual testing. And so the way we handle that, since we have kind of a graph representation of the application, is as you make changes in one test. So, for example, let's say I just made a change to donate data. I either change the element that navigates to the next screen, or I change the order between get notified and donate data. As we actually save the test, we're running an impact analysis to identify all the other tests that actually have a similar pattern, and it will actually even tell you which changes we want to make, and then you can decide if you want to apply those changes and how you want to apply those changes. Do you just want to apply them and as bulk actions, or do you just want to apply them to some of the tests and maybe keep them tentative? And so if I keep them tentative, then this is what happens when so you see there's a little maintenance icon next to the latest news, and this is the screen that was that was suggested, and I can accept or reject the changes. And again, I can apply that as a bulk action as well, in which case I wouldn't actually need to go into this test and approve that. But that's another reason why you don't really have a snapshot, because right now this test, if I didn't approve the change and I'm going to run that test, it's going to run just like any other just like it was previously. So it's not going to perform this action. This action is tentative, but once I approve, it actually gets added to my test, which is again another reason why it's not a static version of the script.
Awesome. All right, Shlomo, what else? I know you were talking about in the podcast how it's almost like an exploratory crawler. I think you were able to upload someone's app and be able to show them errors before you even met with the client, I think is what you said. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially we test the packaged version of the application. So I many times I just went online, I took an APK, and I just start testing the application. Last time it took me about 8 minutes to get like 3-4 tests going, even without the autonomous crawler, and so that's a much faster time to market. And yeah, so usually by the time we talk to an organization, we've already tested the application. Quick benchmark for kind of the state of quality today, I would say about 5 out of 6 companies we talk to, we usually find bugs either before we talk to them. It actually happened a couple of times where we found bugs during literally during the demo. And so we're working with a very large enterprise that I think it was the first or second time we met with them, and we had a test that was in their view was supposed to fail, and it didn't, and apparently it found an element that they thought that they removed. StubHub, actually one of the applications that I'm showing right now, when in one of the demos, they had CSS leaking into the front end. And so yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of bugs that it's actually pretty easy to find those bugs.
Awesome. All right, Shani, anything else? I don't want to interrupt your flow here.
I kind of talked a little bit about the kind of the execution time and the stability. So maybe I'll just show one final thing. Let's actually do that on Android. So these are like real stats. So first of all, you can see kind of the how the quality of the builds have improved and the stability as well. And if I'll go into one of those tests, so this test you can see took about 5 minutes. Most of the tests, by the way, take about 2 minutes or so. The reason this test took 5 minutes has to do with the length of the test, and so this test is 57 screens long, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And so about 80 to 100 actions, I would say, when we just started working with Appium, this kind of test would probably take about 25 minutes. So again, we're able to reduce that to less than 6 minutes.
Very cool.
By the way, it does connect to your Stack. So I mean, I'm showing a UI, but we also have a CLI, and so you can just plug it into your CI. You can automate the entire process from uploading your new build to running a suite of tests. You can, run different suites at different times. And so the idea is a lot of the organizations, when we talk to them, they're kind of, usually there's at some point it gets to QA. QA usually takes a few days, and so the feedback loop to the developer is relatively long, and many times they actually find bugs a few weeks after the feature was developed, which means that the cost of fixing that bug is pretty high. And so the fact that you can give your developers one, something that honestly they can maintain literally in just a minute or two, and two, something that they as soon as they finish developing something, they just push, a suite of tests is running, and they get feedback in literally in a few minutes. When we can run a lot of these tests in parallel, which means that pretty much in, I don't know, 5-10 minutes you get feedback. And they get videos, and they get logs, and they get steps to reproduce. I mean, it transforms the organization into both in terms of quality as well as the speed.
Great. Shani, someone just asked, Sarah wants to know, can you tell us what the tool can't do AI-wise? I guess they want to know like cases where AI will not work for them, or what this particular your tool can't help with. So it sounds like it only works for apps for one, but is there any limitations within the AI that you see in general?
So the AI is used to help you with authoring. The AI is not due to replace what you're doing, and the reason being, actually when we started 21, I was a big proponent of doing autonomous testing. So essentially spinning up tests on the fly with no human intervention. Uh, as we started kind of looking at test cases, one, we saw that at the end of the day, each organization has its own set of scenarios that they want to go through, and they don't really want something crawling through their app, and just they don't really know what's being tested and what's not. And two, we saw a lot of scenarios where, I mean, you can do that with AI. I mean, again, AI can help you write the test, but doing negative assertions, looking at can the user not perform a certain action? You're editing data, and you want to make sure that that data got applied. So again, what we do is we help you kind of build the flow, but at the end of the day, at least today, it's up to you to define the flow. Down the line, we want to connect to production and enrich the test in a way that right now it takes me, let's say, about 3 minutes to write a basic test. Maybe it's going to take someone in the audience about 30 to 45 minutes. We want to get it down to literally 5-10 minutes, but that's something we'll need to do by connecting into production. Something that the AI cannot do, so if you think about, so for example, the maintenance, so when we run an impact analysis, at the end of the day, it's up to the user to decide what test he wants to update and which ones he doesn't. We debated that a little bit. We thought that we don't want to be in a situation where a bunch of tests gets updated and the user literally doesn't know about that. And so that's something that we felt we can get much better results by having input from the user around what flows he wants to update and what not. And if you think about that, I mean, you might have literally the same scenario. You're just plugging in with two different user profiles and two different credentials, and you're getting different outcome. And so, we could have potentially update one test would update the other with the new credentials, which is exactly the reason why the test maintenance is somewhat guided. So so that's an example where we kind of we put the AI on hold and said let's give the user the opportunity to give us some guidance. I can tell you there's two other cases that I can think of that I actually think down the line AI can assist, but at least for now, um, so a lot of the way that you test an application is really dependent on the locators that you're selecting. And so, for example, if you take maybe if I'll take an iOS application, then I mean you can click. You'll have a button. You'll have a text inside, and you can click on the button, you can click on the text. If you click on the text many times, it's not going to work. If you click on the button, it will. And one of the things that we've seen testers do is actually they click on the text because it's more unique. So you see there's the text inside the button, and this actually is not a good representation because this one is not a purely native application, but in other application you'll have a button element and a text inside. And so today it's up to the user to actually select the right element. This is actually a case where probably down the line AI can assist. Yeah, and I can think of other cases where we gradually had to apply more AI, to make the test more stable and reliable. We had to use visual validation in certain cases, but yeah, maybe these are some cases where I cannot really help.
Great. So Shani, I guess Sarah made another point. He says, in Selenium, we can pass multiple locators for a particular element with the use of the find all annotation using Page Factory. So how does that differ from AI? I assume like AI, you don't need to specify it, right? On the fly, it would automatically will know. Is that the main difference between those?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, you didn't see me, doing anything around locators. It's all very visual. I just point to an element on the screen, and it knows, it automatically finds the right locator. The other thing is, in mobile, you have different frameworks, and Appium works very differently on some of these frameworks. There are objects on Flutter, for example, that Appium just wouldn't recognize. And so it's not about, running a query and just getting a response back. It's about, you need something a little more sophisticated than that. And just finding the right balance between, kind of how do you use all these properties and what's the right one to use, and when you can find a set of properties, it means that the test should actually fail. Just had a lot to do with that. So it was more than just running a query and just doing some kind of fuzzy search.
So, how about weights? I know a lot of people struggle with waiting the right time. Does this handle it for you in the background as well, using some sort of AI or non-AI type technology?
Yeah, that's a great point. And so you're right. One of the challenges with mobile, especially with real devices, is you don't know how long it's going to take, and especially, I mean, we just added also support for network conditions, and so I'll try and see if I can find it very quickly. So anyway, you're right. Wait time is a big issue. The way we handle that is in two ways. So one, most applications actually have progress bars, so they give you some kind of indication, that the screen hasn't fully loaded. So we identify a lot of these progress bars, and I would say it probably, it kind of gives you in 80% of the cases that's been great, and it actually adapted the test to those wait times. Then we've added a mechanism for retry, and so I would say between the two, in 90-95% of test cases, that helps, and then we also have the ability to add weights, and so that's just in case you have a rare case where none of the other applies. But that's a great point.
Great. So I guess the network, you have a new network emulator. I know when I talk to other folks, sometimes they say a dirty network will affect the timing of certain transactions that go on with an application. So you're able to emulate that as well and give them a real world type of scenario. Nice.
Yeah, we can do that. We can inject location. We can do interruption testing. So yeah, you can even set cookies. And as I mentioned, we don't. I mean, I'm kind of struggling between codeless and I wouldn't say we're. I mean, you can write some custom actions as well, and so a lot of times our clients wants to run, all kinds of logic and maybe randomize their parameters or use today's date or do all kinds of appending of text, and so we do support some custom code, but the idea is that it's a lightweight custom code as well, and it's not. I want to be careful with the word codeless.
So Shani, how about test data? Is it does it crawl an application, and is it smart enough to be contextually aware that okay, I'm on a screen that has an item that's add to the basket? It's able to add test data for you, or do people need to set that up as well ahead of time?
So when we call for the application, the only two data points that we're asking are our username and password, because most applications are gated and we can't really, that's something we can't really, figure out. So that's the only two data points that we are asking, and then most of the data, at least in cases where we were able to figure out the context of the page and the text box, we will populate the data ourselves. And so if I'll go, just wanna see if I can find the sign up page in StubHub. I think that's the next one. So if I go to the sign up, for example, so if I need to plug in an email address, a first name, a last name, that's not a problem. You can do that. You can just say set text and let's go to email, and I'll do autonomously generated. And by the way, the same thing works on the autonomous crawler as well. So we know what the context of this textbook is, and we'll populate the relevant data. By the way, one other point maybe to mention, we talked a little bit about the challenges of Appium. So one of the challenges is, again, different frameworks. The way you set text actually in Android and iOS is very different. The way you set text in, I don't know, in a React or a Flutter application as opposed to a native is very, very different. And so, so from our user standpoint, they just set text. They're not really aware of what's happening in the background, and they don't really care about, again, the framework or the type of operating system. But under the hood, we do try different mechanisms to set the text before we actually, and so that's one of the challenges. By the way, that's another area where, again, maybe down the line we'll use some AI, but I think for now, kind of the trade-off versus benefit is, or the effort versus value is questionable. But again, depending on how the developer develop that text box, we've seen cases where it needs to sense a keyboard stroke. And when you set text through Appium, usually, again, there's multiple ways you can set that. If you do that by setting the text without the keyboard, the application might not be aware that there's actual value. And there's all kinds of, in some applications, there's like race conditions around when a certain button is enabled. So that's where we just gave the user the ability to say use keyboard as opposed to just letting the AI figure it out. We found that kind of the challenge with what we do is when there's, we have a couple of dozens of applications in the system under test already and different frameworks. And when you're trying to build something that's generic to a lot of applications, that's, sometimes it's just easier to get one data point from the user as opposed to trying to use AI for that.
Great. So Shani, Saurabh has a question. He wants to know, can you run parallel tests on multiple devices at the same time?
Yeah, sure. So you can actually, and what I'm showing is for the UI, but at the same time, you can do that for any, you can do that for the CLI as well. In this case, I only have one build, but I can choose whichever builds, and I can choose whichever suites, and I can choose specific tests, and then I can pretty much do a mix of any devices that I want. I can combine real devices as well, and it will run in parallel. So yes. Great question.
Nice. So Shani, I think we talked earlier on the podcast as well. You had certain assumptions you thought about when you did the first iteration on your product. Then you talked to a bunch of customers and you came away with okay, I'm going to do something else. Could you just talk a little bit about that lesson learned, what the assumption was, and then what you found out and why you actually created this particular solution?
So when we started 21, the goal was to really do autonomous testing, and that's kind of, I think there were a couple of questions around how we autonomously code for the application. So we took about 70, 80 applications. We started developing that. We showed early prototypes to a bunch of customers. And again, the feedback was, they would each have, somewhere between a piece of paper or an Excel sheet to, a test management system where they would have, somewhere between 50 to 300 scenarios, and they would say, this is what we test for before we actually deploy. And so the quarter, while being very efficient and very, the time to value is very short, it didn't accommodate a lot of the scenarios. I mentioned, negative scenarios. I mentioned editing. You want to test what's the error messages that you're getting when you're trying to plug in an incorrect password or incorrect credentials. We just had yesterday a customer that was testing all kinds of validations around you change your password, but there are certain characters you can plug in, and so they want to make sure that those error messages appear. Those type of things an autonomous caller would not be able to test for. What we figured out is what the autonomous caller did well is kind of build that graph. And so, but it only gave us a snapshot of that graph. And so we had to adapt that graph to, kind of the user's inputs in terms of creating additional tests on its own. And then we shifted to something that's, as I showed, it's very AI guided. And so, kind of the challenge with a lot of when you're writing scripts is you think you have the right locator, you click on that, you get to the wrong screen, and then just starting to change that takes a lot of time. And so, so we build an editor that allows you to do a lot of actions that that you define, but again in a very smooth and guided way. And so so that's that. And then we released the first product, and the technology worked well. But again, mobile testing is very, very complex, and so visualizing that required a little bit of work, and we did some work on the UI, and that's kind of the outcome is what you're seeing here. And so that's kind of how we went from doing autonomous testing to an AI-guided editor.
Cool. So Shani, Brian wants to know, can this actually help you also find out gaps in coverage, test coverage? Because you said you can know when a screen changes, then make that change across all the tests that use that screen change. So if someone introduces a new screen, are you then able to say, well, this is going to impact these 5 tests because I know this
Yes.
screen appears in these 5 tests?
Exactly, yeah. So whether it's a screen that was updated, first of all, if a screen was updated, we autonomously update all the other tests. So at the end of the day, we have a single inventory of screens, and any instance of that screen will point to to that inventory. And so the assumption is that if you change a screen in one test, that probably means that you have a new version of that screen, and you probably if you want to click on something else, etc., you want to make that available for other tests. The same thing even if it's not a screen that's already in the system, if you just added a new functionality, as you add that in one test, the same impact analysis will be able to identify other tests where it's relevant. I thought Brian was actually asking a different question, which was around analyzing your coverage. I think analyzing your coverage, and so Brian, I apologize, I'm going to take your question to something else that I think would actually interest you a lot. I think I spoke to someone at HP earlier this week, and he said something very interesting, and I totally concur with that. It's not about writing as many tests as possible, it's about writing the right amount of tests. And the right amount of tests is a combination of is essentially an input of what your users are doing throughout the application. And so if there's a certain part of the application that very 0.1% of your users navigate there, maybe it's not that important to test that out. But I don't know, maybe those are premium users that are navigating there, or maybe you have a certain flow that an X% of your users are navigating to. And so the biggest challenge in the industry today, in my view, is understanding your coverage. It's understanding what users are doing in production as opposed to what you're testing. And that's where we're in final stages, and we'll introduce that in the next month or so. But we're able to we develop a very lightweight integration into production. That doesn't, by the way, require you necessarily to install SDKs and stuff. And we can visualize what you're testing as opposed to what users are doing in production. And that way you can look at a map and one, understand what's your real coverage, and two, figure out what's the next flows that you want to focus on to get the maximum ROI, as opposed to just burning the ocean. I've seen a lot of testers that they literally take the same scenario and they tweak that around multiple times. And again, those tests, I mean, even if they would fail, I don't think anyone on the dev team is at any point going to fix those bugs, because they're so unvaluable, and so there's just no point in testing those. And I think generally there's a big opportunity in kind of giving more visibility to both testers and developers in terms of what's happening in production. I've seen that in prior companies, that when developers and testers understand what users are doing in production, they build better product, they build better features, they test them much better. And so, that's kind of where 21 is, that's kind of the bigger vision and what we're going to be working on the next couple of months.
Cool. Shani, I believe in one demo you gave me, I forgot what it was. You showed me a cool view of all the different pages that make up an app or something, and you were showing how things interact with one another. I don't know if you remember that, but could you show that?
Yeah, I actually have that on a different application in a way that's more robust. But I think this will be helpful. This is actually, StarWeb is a relatively easy to crawl application. I mean, you're saying about 40 screens or so, and I would say that's probably 99% of the test. and that's kind of the graphic representation of that. And that's probably like literally the first screen that we had when we were still developing the autonomous crawler. There's another application that's actually pretty cool. I showed BetterHelp earlier today. BetterHelp actually has an onboarding questionnaire of about 30 steps and or 30 screens. And depending on how you answer the question, the next screen is going to show up. And so there's about 100 combinations, and just seeing those 100 combinations in a visual representation is pretty cool. But I probably need to get approval for that before I share that. But this one is probably gives you a good view as well.
Nice. I was just thinking of a user case. I know a company that has clinical trials, and they have basically templates of forms, but based on the customer's need, different forms are different. And just having this visual would help them be able to see, okay, yeah, all these forms and the flow is correct and they've been tested. So I think it's a good
so
view.
Now think about kind of taking production data as well and embedding that on top of that, and that really gives you a great view of what's the impact of what you're doing.
Oh, that's cool. Are you able to do that now with production?
We're still in process of developing that, but I would say we're going to release that in the next month or so.
Cool. All right. So Sergio also asked about battery life, or monitoring the battery. Are you able to do anything monitoring the battery? Is that some sort of test you can help perform as well?
Not today. I'll need to look into that a little bit. It's be an interesting use case, and I don't even know if you can adjust the battery on whether it's an emulator or a device. On a real device usually connects to a USB, so by default it's fully charged. But not today. We can probably look into that. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to look into that. It's Shani, Shani at 21labs.io.
All right, Shani, those are all the questions we have so far. If you could put your camera on, I want to ask you one last question. I want people to be able to see you. Before we get to the question, though, is there any last piece of feature you want to show folks about AI in general before we go to our parting question?
No, I think that's I think I overpitched more than I planned to, and the plan was to focus a lot about Appium and AI, and so I think I hope that was helpful for the audience as well, and we kind of were able to inject a lot of what AI in testing, again, in my view and my experiences, and so
Cool. All right, Sean, if you could just stop sharing, I just want to see you on camera really quick so folks can see you. Very good. Awesome. All right, Shani, before we go.
I actually have another.
Yeah. Any parting words of wisdom you want to leave the guild?
I'm very passionate about connecting production and testing. I think there's a huge opportunity there to create better tests. So that's one. Two, for those that have worked with Appium, it's a great framework, but a very challenging one. When I took the journey of doing mobile testing, honestly, I think we underestimated the challenges around Appium. And we're still uncovering some of those challenges every now and then. But it's a passion, and I hope we can make an impact to some of you in the audience. Reach out to me. Let me know what you think about what we're showing. And if you tell me that you came through Joe in this podcast, then I'll personally follow up with you.
And Shani, one last question. Someone just slipped it in really quick. They want to know about memory leaks. Can this help you find memory leaks?
It will, as long as the application crashes. So usually when you have memory leaks, the application crashes. So it will, and then you can get access to both the Appium logs as well as locats. And shortly we're actually going to add like device vitals as well. And so, yeah, so between those, you should have pretty much anything that you need to reproduce as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Shani. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I saw an early presentation of what you did earlier, and now you've come a long way. So I'm really excited to see where you go going forward. So thank you so much for spreading your knowledge with us today.
I appreciate you not showing any of the early stages UIs and so UI screenshots. So it was my design. So yeah.
Yeah, the UX got a lot better too. So yeah, kudos to you. So good, great job. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Shani. Talk to you later. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so that was Shani. If you miss any of this, this is being recorded, and I will send you a link to the recording probably next week after I do some quick editing. I like to edit out the beginning of the session, and so you will have recordings if you missed anything. Thank you all for your questions. Thank you, Sarab. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, everyone, for your questions today. And just a reminder, this edition of the Test Guild Meetup is sponsored by Testum. Testum wanted to give back in this time of need to the community, so they have a free community edition where you get 1,000 runs per month. All you need to do is click on this button down below, register now to get it. Run. So you definitely want to do this before it goes away, because I don't know how long I'm going to have this offer, but click on that register now button, and then they'll know, hey, you came from Joe's Meetup, so they help me with getting people to do more sponsorships there as well. So thank you for that. And really cool company there. I think Shani was actually involved in Testum at one point as well. So a lot of great knowledge was there and is still there. So AI is really cool thing to check out there as well. So I want to thank you and see you all next week. And any questions anytime, just let me know. Drop me a note at joe@testguild.com. So thanks everyone again. And see you next time. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.